BlackBerry was the first company that brought emails to a personal device. This was a Canadian company leading innovation. And this innovation took BlackBerry from being a nobody to being one of the biggest companies in Canada within no time. So in 2007, when Steve Jobs revealed iPhone, BlackBerry was already at the top of the hill. They were the undisputed kings of smartphones. And as we all know, BlackBerry became complacent and failed to innovate, leading to their death. Which is fine. It's capitalism. At the end of the day, the winner takes it all. That's not what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is what followed the breakdown of BlackBerry. You see, the fall of a giant like BlackBerry should have given birth to new companies that could have scaled up down the road. After all, there were smart, innovative people who were working for BlackBerry. Why couldn't they leave the company and innovate on their own? What went wrong? Like when Sun Microsystems in America crashed after the dot-com bubble, there were companies that were positioned to fill up the space. Literally, Sun Microsystems campus in Menlo Park, California, is now the headquarters of Facebook. Or just look at the PayPal mafia. These employees that were once part of PayPal have gone ahead and started massive companies like YouTube, Yelp, LinkedIn, Tesla, and many more. Well, this phenomenon with BlackBerry isn't a one-off. You see, over the years, the Canadian economy has done an excellent job at stifling growth and innovation. For decades, the Canadian economy has had issues, and as a result, the standard of living in Canada is not keeping up to pace with the rest of the G7 countries. In this video, we look at what are these economic issues that the Canadian government needs to fix, and we also look at why there's been no such thing as BlackBerry or companies similar to it ever since then. So let's get started. Back when the European colonizers came to Canada, fur was all the rage in Europe. For this fur, the natives were killed and their land was taken. Later on, when England and other superpowers needed timber to make their ships to conquer the seas and colonize more of the world, the Canadian economy transitioned from fur trading to timber exports. Then in the 20th century, the Canadian economy shifted once again, this time towards manufacturing and exporting its resources, playing a key role in both the world wars. This brief history brings us to where the Canadian economy largely is in today's day and age. Three main sectors that the Canadian economy depends on are real estate, mining, and manufacturing. Now, mining involves oil, gas, and other natural resources which Canada has an abundance of. And over the years, these resources have helped Canada maintain a high standard of living. But lately, it seems like the Canadian standard of living has been under a threat because the Canadian standard of living started dropping. Meanwhile, G7 and US kept growing. So I decided to do some digging, and the first thing I found out was around 2014, something went wrong. Looking at this graph, it seemed like something big happened in 2014. After all, the Canadian economy had a drastic drop. When I looked further, there were no crashes, no recessions, nothing to speak of that could have caused such a drop in the standard of living just in 1 year. After trying to piece everything together, I decided to step back and look at the bigger picture. You see, the Canadian standard of living was stagnant from 1990s to 2000 as well. The period of growth between 2002 and 2014 was just a result of higher than ever before oil prices. This oil boom definitely helped the Canadian standard of living. But once the oil prices were back down, we were back to square one. For comparison, here's a list of top 19 countries in terms of standard of living in 1981. Canada is number 5. However, if you just fast forward to 2021, Canada has dropped a whole bunch. But first, let's try and understand what is standard of living or GDP per capita. So standard of living is calculated by dividing the gross domestic product or GDP of a country by the population residing within the country. Basically, the idea is the more the people produce in a country, the more take-home salary and income they have, hence increasing their standard of living. So if you were to look at the countries of the world, the developing countries will have a low GDP per capita, while developed countries have a higher GDP per capita, giving them a higher standard of living. If the GDP numbers are growing and the population is staying steady, let's say, your standard of living continues to grow. But on the other hand, if your GDP numbers are staying stagnant and your population starts to grow, your standard of living starts to shrink. Now, having understood what standard of living is, let's look at what is happening with the Canadian standard of living. You see, the Canadian GDP since at least 2014 to now has been growing, and it has been growing at the second highest pace among all G7 countries. So that's clearly not the issue. But if you look at the population, Canada has also had one of the highest growth rates in its population among all G7 countries, which is a bit of a head scratcher. You see, a lot of people will oversimplify this and just blame it on the population growth. But if you look at the real numbers, this increase in GDP on the top of this equation is derived from increase in population. The only way the Canadian economy has kept on growing at the rate it has, it's been thanks to the growth in its population. Unfortunately, the answer is not that simple. You see, the number on the top in this equation, that is GDP, is quite straightforward. It's money. It's either going up or going down. But the number at the bottom is population, which is not just quantitative, after all, population can go up or down, but it's qualitative as well. The population could have a lot of young people, a lot of old people could be working hard, could not be working hard. It could be many factors. So let's look into that further. The real question here, I guess, would be, are the Canadians working hard or hardly working? Furthermore, majority of the people who are of working age are actually employed, as the unemployment rate which in turn has helped to improve the old age dependency ratio in the country. An old age dependency ratio is something most of the G7 countries are struggling with at the moment. Furthermore, majority of the people who are of working age are actually employed, as the unemployment rate has been quite low. If anything, Canada has one of the highest women participation in the workforce. Even though the standard of living has been stagnant since 2014, Canadians are clocking in the second highest amount of hours worked per week as compared to all G7 countries. There are more Canadians who are able to work, there are more Canadians who are actually employed as well, and further on top, there are more Canadians who are putting more hours in. So what's wrong? Why is the standard of living stagnant? Maybe then the question should be, are the Canadians just working hard or are they working smart? You see, when you look at the productivity numbers, that is exactly what you find. Canadians are working hard, but not smart. In other words, a Canadian worker who goes to a Canadian factory will produce products worth, let's say, $50,000 a year. You take the same person with the same skills and send him to an American factory, he is now producing about $78,000 worth of product in the same amount of time with the same skills. The issue isn't the person itself, but the factory the person's going to. You see, the Canadian factory and the American factory are in two different leagues. So what's happening in these Canadian factories? Why is the same employee producing less in Canada as compared to America? For starters, the Canadian companies are not investing enough in machinery and equipment. And both these investments help an employee produce more product within a given span of time. The reason the Canadian companies are not investing more is because of lack of competition that exists within Canada. You see, for the most part, Canada has a very low population, which means the market size is very small. And to make matters worse, most of this population is concentrated in a few key locations within Canada. So, for example, a big company in Vancouver and Toronto can exist and make profit without ever having to compete. However, if you look at America or even Europe, where they have sizable populations with highly integrated markets, the companies are always competing with each other. And this increase in competition is what leads to these companies investing in their workers to ensure that they're producing more product and being more profitable for these companies. The same lack of competition and its impacts can be felt when you're looking at the amount the companies are spending on research and development. Canada ranks one of the lowest amongst all G7 countries when it comes to percentage of their GDP being spent on research and development. Now here's the thing that kind of reinforces the idea that Canada has the potential, but it's losing them. You see, Canada is the highest spender in research and development when it comes to tertiary level education or universities, which means Canada is always at the forefront when it comes to producing new novel ideas, inventions, and things that would take you to the future. However, when it comes to taking these inventions and making them into products that would one day make money, that's where Canada fails. Which takes me to my third point on why the Canadian economy suffered for so long. That is lack of support for innovation. You see, all of these people who are working on research and development in Canadian universities, they typically come up with an idea and then they move to America. This is something I can say from a personal experience. A friend of mine who works in nanotechnologies had a great idea. He and his friends started a company. In Canada, they were able to attract about $36,000 of investment. And looking at that number, they decided to pack up and move to San Francisco. Within a year, their startup had millions of dollars at their disposal. And it's this lack of venture capital that exists within Canada. It's been hurting Canadian economy for a very long time. Ever since BlackBerry fell, the only big Canadian tech company that has come to the forefront is Shopify. Meanwhile, America's seen numerous companies. I mean, a whole bunch of them have propped up. Just look at, again, the PayPal mafia. There's a whole bunch of companies that have started and grown into big companies. This brings me to the final part of the video. So what can the Canadian government do? I mean, this issue has been there since 1980s. If they don't do something about it, we will just keep falling behind, especially as the world transitions away from oil and gas. For starters, the Canadian government needs to incentivize venture capital and create an innovation-first environment. If the businesses are failing to spend on R&D, the government needs to set up programs that assist with research and development. Look at DARPA, an American government agency responsible for research and development, which has gone ahead and financed and invented internet, something that has revolutionized the world. DARPA has also been involved in other technologies that are used in smartphones, exoskeletons, and 3D printing. Here's a list of the top 15 Canadian companies by market capitalization. And then here's a list of American companies. The median age of a Canadian company compared to the median age of America pretty much tells you the whole picture. You see, Canada doesn't lack big companies. What Canada lacks is new innovative companies. On our list, there's only one company, that is Shopify, which is even from this century. Recently, the Canadian government has taken a few steps and started something called the Innovation Fund. The idea is if a company wants to carry out research and development, the Canadian government would assist them with certain amounts of funds, making it cheaper and easier for a company to do research and development. However, as I said at the beginning of this video, this issue has been ongoing for a very, very long time. And if something's not done soon enough, the Canadian standard of living will be amongst the lowest in G20, not just G7, in the next decade or two. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do subscribe. I'll see you in a week or two's time from now. Peace.